You ever get that feeling when something sounds too perfect, but you push that thought away because you want it to be real so badly? Yeah, that was me. Let me take you back for a moment. 3 weeks before my life completely unraveled, my phone rang while I was standing in my laundry room, folding warm clothes fresh out of the dryer. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists when you live alone long enough for silence to become your routine. Same walls, same ticking clock, same ache in my chest that never really left after my son moved away. I remember thinking it was probably a spam call, or maybe a neighbor. Nothing important ever called me anymore. Then I saw the name on the screen, Jessica, my daughter-in-law, and right away my stomach tightened. Now, let me be clear, Jessica had been married to my son David for 5 years at that point, and our relationship was civil, polite. Distant, she never called me mom, not once, just a stiff, formal Carol, like I was someone she worked with, not the woman who raised her husband. So when I answered and heard excitement in her voice, that should have been my first warning. Mom Carol, she said cheerfully. Mom Carol, I actually froze. My heart skipped in a way it hadn't done in years. Mom Carol, she continued, the baby's due any day now. And we'd love for you to be here when he arrives. Love, be here when he arrives. Those words hit me like sunlight after a long winter. I was 65 years old, and I had waited my entire adult life to hear something like that, to feel wanted, included, needed by my own family again. She kept talking, her voice warm and glowing through the phone. She told me how excited she was, how she wanted her baby surrounded by family, how she already knew I'd be an amazing grandmother. She said she wanted her son to grow up knowing love from every direction. And here's the part that still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. Something felt off. I can't explain it logically, but there was a small voice in the back of my mind whispering, this isn't right. This is sudden, but I ignored it, because when you spent 8 straight months imagining holding your first grandchild, logic doesn't stand a chance. Hope takes the wheel and everything else gets shoved into the trunk. I live in Phoenix. They live in Denver. That's 15 hours of highway, endless desert, changing skies, mountain passes, and exhaustion baked into asphalt. And I didn't hesitate for even a second. The moment I hung up the phone, I started planning like this was the biggest event of my life, because to me it was. I bought new clothes, clothes nice enough for hospital photos. I bought baby gifts, thoughtful ones, personal ones. I booked a hotel near the hospital, not cheap, but I told myself it didn't matter. This was family. In my mind, I could already see everything so clearly. David smiling when he saw me, my grandson wrapped in a blue blanket. That moment when life finally felt complete. I replayed the phone call in my head over and over again. She wants me there. She said she wanted me there. Looking back now, with everything I know, that phone call wasn't an invitation. It was bait, and I swallowed it whole, never realizing I was already walking straight into a trap. I didn't know it then, but every single mile I drove that day was carrying me closer to humiliation. I left Phoenix before the sun even thought about rising. The sky was still dark, the streets empty, and the air carried that early morning chill that makes everything feel quiet and serious. My car was packed neatly, suitcase in the trunk, baby gifts wrapped carefully, a small cooler with water and snacks on the passenger seat, coffee in hand, hope in my chest, heart wide open. 15 hours doesn't sound that bad when you say it out loud. People throw that number around like it's nothing. But once you're actually living it, minute by minute, it becomes something else entirely. After the first few hours, your excitement starts battling your body. Your back begins to ache in places you didn't even know could hurt. Your legs stiffen. Your eyes burn from staring at endless road lines, but I didn't complain. Not once, because every mile meant I was closer to my grandson. I told myself the exhaustion would be worth it, that this was what love looked like, showing up, no matter how uncomfortable it was. I didn't stop to sightsee. I didn't stop to stretch. I didn't stop for anything except gas and caffeine, just long enough to fuel the car and myself. Twice during that drive, I called David. Not because I needed anything, I just wanted to hear his voice. I wanted reassurance that this was real, that I wasn't imagining the warmth in Jessica's words. Both times, Jessica answered his phone. Both times, her voice was sweet. Almost too sweet. Hi, Mom Carol, she said softly. Drive safe. We're so excited. We can't wait to see you. Can't wait. I replayed those words in my head as the miles rolled on. Funny thing about lies, when someone delivers them smoothly enough, you don't even realize you're being deceived. They sound just like the truth. Somewhere in Utah, the weather turned. Snow started falling hard and fast, covering the road in a thin white layer that made my hands grip the steering wheel tighter. Tractor trailers passed me like giants, spraying slush across my windshield. I slowed down, heart pounding, whispering prayers under my breath. Please, just let me get there safely. At that point, I was running on adrenaline and stubbornness. My body begged for rest, but my mind kept repeating the same sentence over and over. Just get there, just get there. By the time I crossed into Colorado, my head was throbbing and my eyes felt heavy. Every song on the radio blurred together. My coffee stopped working hours ago. Still, I pushed on. Finally, mercifully, the Denver skyline appeared in the distance. When I pulled into the hospital parking garage, the dashboard clock read 2 o'clock a.m., Tuesday morning, 15 hours, no sleep, no hesitation. I sat in the car for a moment, hands shaking, taking a deep breath before stepping out into the cold night air. I was exhausted beyond words, but I was glowing. This was it. This was the moment I'd been dreaming about. Inside the hospital, the maternity ward was quiet, that strange mix of calm and urgency that only exists in places where life begins. The receptionist looked up from her desk, checked her screen, and smiled politely. "Jessica's in labor," she said. "Room 314. Room 314. I don't think my feet even touched the floor as I walked down that hallway. My exhaustion disappeared, replaced by adrenaline and emotion. My heart was racing, my chest tight with anticipation. I was about to become a grandmother, then I saw my son. David was pacing outside the delivery room, hands buried in his hair. His shoulders were tense, his movements frantic. Something about him looked wrong. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't excited. He wasn't glowing the way new fathers usually are. He looked panicked. The second he saw me, his entire face changed. Not relief, not joy, not thank God you're here. Fear, pure, unmistakable fear. "Mom," he said quickly, lowering his voice. "What are you doing here?" That question hit harder than any slap ever could. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "Jessica invited me. She wanted me here." His eyes darted toward the delivery room door like it might hear us. She changed her mind," he said. "She doesn't want family around. She wants it to be just us, just us." Those two words echoed in my head after a 15-hour drive, after begging me to come, after promising love and inclusion. I stood there in that hospital hallway, exhausted, confused, and suddenly very aware that something wasn't right. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned, and I was standing right in the middle of it. Nothing in life prepares you for the moment your own child chooses someone else's comfort over your presence, especially not in a hospital hallway. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't demanding anything. I wasn't even asking to be in the delivery room. All I said was, "David, I drove 15 hours. I just want to be nearby." That was it. But he let out a long sigh, the kind people make when they think you're being unreasonable. "Mom," he said quietly, "Jessica's really emotional right now. The doctor said stress could complicate the delivery." That's when something clicked in my mind. This wasn't about stress, this was about control. Jessica didn't want me there, not in the waiting room, not down the hall, not anywhere she could feel my presence. And David was choosing the path of least resistance. Standing there, exhausted and humiliated, I realized I didn't have the energy to fight. My body ached, my heart felt bruised, and whatever excitement I had left was draining fast, so I swallowed my pride. "Okay," I said softly. "I'll go to the hotel, just call me when the baby's born." Do you know what hurt the most? David looked relieved, not conflicted, not guilty, relieved. That expression will haunt me for the rest of my life. I walked out of the hospital alone at 2 in the morning, the cold Denver air biting into my skin, my suitcase rolling behind me like a reminder that I didn't belong. Back in the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my coat, staring at my phone. Every vibration made my heart jump. Every minute felt like an hour. I checked the clock constantly. I checked my phone constantly. Nothing. I barely slept. Around 10 o'clock m, my phone finally rang. "David, he's here, Mom," he said, happiness spilling into his voice. "Nathan, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. My grandson was born." I smiled even though my eyes filled with tears. "When can I meet him?" I asked. There was a pause, a long one. "Well, Jessica's exhausted," David said. "The delivery was rough. The doctor says she needs rest." "I understand," I replied quickly. "Later today is fine. Maybe give us a day or two," he said. A day or two. I had driven 15 hours for a day or two. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I waited. I sent polite texts. I asked how Jessica was feeling. I asked if they needed anything. No replies. 2 full days passed. By Friday morning, something inside me couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't asking for pictures or holding the baby. I just wanted to see him. So I drove back to the hospital, thinking maybe I could look through the nursery window. Just one glimpse, one moment to make it real. That's when the receptionist looked at me and said words that knocked the air out of my lungs. They were discharged yesterday, discharged, gone, without telling me. I walked back to my car in a daze and called David immediately. "You took him home?" I asked. Without even saying goodbye, "She wanted her space, Mom," he replied. Space. That single word told me everything I needed to know. I hung up the phone, packed my things, and started the long drive back to Phoenix, this time with an empty trunk and a heart heavier than it had ever been. I cried part of the way. I drove in silence most of the way. And somewhere between Colorado and Arizona, something inside me hardened. If they wanted to erase me from my grandson's birth, fine. But here's the thing they didn't know yet. 4 days later, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Jessica, it wasn't David, it was the hospital. And that call changed everything because karma doesn't always knock, sometimes it calls. 4 days after my grandson was born, I was back home in Phoenix. Physically, I had made it home. Emotionally, I was still somewhere on that highway between Denver and Arizona, replaying every moment in my head and wondering how things had gone so wrong so fast. My suitcase sat half unpacked in the corner of my bedroom. I hadn't had the energy to finish. Every time I looked at it, I saw the baby gifts I never got to give, the clothes I bought for photos that never happened, and the excitement that had turned into quiet humiliation. I kept telling myself to let it go. David was an adult. Jessica was a new mother. Maybe time would soften things, but none of that erased the way I'd been dismissed, ignored, and quietly pushed out. That Sunday afternoon, the house was silent again. No laundry running, no television on, just me and my thoughts. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach tighten. Denver General Hospital. For a moment, I just stared at it. Part of me wanted to ignore the call completely. I had already been hurt enough. I didn't want to reopen anything tied to that place, but something told me to answer. "Hello," I said. "Is this Carol Martinez?" a woman asked. Her voice was professional, flat, and emotionless, the kind of tone people use when they're dealing with paperwork, not people. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "We're calling regarding the delivery of Nathan David Martinez," she continued. "Unfortunately, the insurance claim was denied, and we need to speak with you about the outstanding balance of $2,300. $2,300. I waited for the panic to hit. It didn't. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. "I think there's been a mistake," I said evenly. "I'm not responsible for that bill." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear keyboard typing. "Our records list you as the financial guarantor for Jessica Martinez's delivery," she said. "Financial guarantor." The words landed slowly, like puzzle pieces sliding into place. "I see," I said. "Can you tell me when that form was signed?" "November 15th, she answered. "Electronically, at 11:47 p.m. November 15th. That date hit me instantly. That was the night I was driving through Utah, deep into that 15-hour trip. 8 hours on the road already, miles away from any hospital. No laptop, no patient portal, spotty cell service at best. "There's no way I could have signed anything," I said. "I was driving." Another pause. "And the signature?" I asked. "It appears to be yours, ma'am." I closed my eyes, not because I was overwhelmed, but because everything suddenly made sense. The invitation, the urgency, the sudden coldness at the hospital, the way I was pushed out so easily. Jessica hadn't just invited me to Denver. She had positioned me. She needed me close. She needed me compliant. She needed me trusting, and when she couldn't control the situation anymore, she tried to make me financially responsible for it. "I'm not paying that bill," I said calmly. "That signature isn't mine." "I understand," the woman replied. "We'll note that in the file." "No," I said firmly. "I need you to understand something else. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is identity theft." Her tone changed immediately. "I'm going to transfer you to our billing supervisor." As I waited on hold, memories flooded back, every cheerful message Jessica sent me during the drive, every reassurance, every promise that felt hollow now. When the supervisor came on the line, I repeated everything. The invitation, the timing, the drive, the fact that I had never agreed to be financially responsible for anything. She listened quietly. "Mrs. Martinez," she finally said, "I'm going to request the signed documentation and have it sent to you." When the email arrived less than half an hour later, my hands were steady as I opened it. My name was there, my address, my personal information, and a signature that wasn't mine. Someone had tried to copy it, poorly. That was the moment I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling clear, because whatever Jessica thought she was doing, it wasn't just cruel. It was illegal, and for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. The moment I finished reading that email from the hospital, something inside me shifted. The sadness didn't disappear, but it moved aside, making room for something stronger, clearer. I had spent days questioning myself, wondering if I'd been too sensitive, too pushy, too hopeful. That doubt vanished in an instant. This wasn't about feelings, this was about facts. I scrolled slowly through the document, line by line, taking my time. Whoever filled it out had done just enough to make it look legitimate at first glance. My full legal name was correct, my address was accurate, even my social security number was listed without a single mistake. Someone had access to my personal information, and then there was the signature. It was supposed to be mine, but it wasn't. The handwriting was stiff, awkward, like someone had studied it briefly and tried to recreate it from memory. It lacked the natural flow of a real signature. It looked copied, forced. My hands didn't shake, my heart didn't race. Instead, I felt a steady calm settle over me. Then I noticed something else. The form identified me as the maternal grandmother. That detail made my jaw tighten. I wasn't the maternal grandmother. Jessica's mother lived in Seattle and was very much alive and involved. That meant whoever filled this out didn't just guess, they deliberately misrepresented my role to make the paperwork fit. It wasn't careless, it was intentional. I checked the timestamp again. The form had been submitted late at night, during the exact window when Jessica was texting me messages like, "Drive safe and we're so excited to see you." That timing wasn't a coincidence. I called the hospital back immediately. "This is Carol Martinez," I said. "I've reviewed the paperwork. I need to report identity theft and fraud." The change in tone on the other end of the line was immediate. "I'm transferring you to our legal department," the woman replied. "Good." When the legal representative came on, I explained everything in detail. I didn't rush, I didn't ramble, I laid it out clearly and calmly. I told them about the phone call inviting me to Denver. I told them about the 15-hour drive. I told them how I was turned away at the hospital. I told them about the forged signature. Then I gave them what they needed most. Proof: I emailed screenshots of Jessica's messages, call logs showing when she contacted me, GPS stamp photos from my drive that proved exactly where I was when the document was signed. The silence on the line stretched longer than I expected. Finally, the representative spoke. "Mrs. Martinez," she said carefully, "based on what you've provided, we will be suspending all charges associated with your name immediately. This matter will be escalated." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "And there's something else," she added. "We are required to file a police report when fraud is suspected." I thanked her. After the call ended, I sat quietly at my kitchen table, staring at the sunlight coming through the window. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt resolved. Because here's something Jessica didn't know, and probably never thought to ask. I spent 35 years working as a medical billing administrator. I knew exactly how hospitals documented responsibility. I knew how electronic signatures were tracked, and I knew how seriously fraud like this was taken. What she saw as a clever shortcut was, in reality, a digital paper trail tied to multiple legal violations. Later that evening, my phone buzzed, a message from David. "Hope you made it home safe. Jessica and the baby are doing great." I stared at the screen for a long moment. They were moving forward, convinced this situation was over. They had no idea that legal departments, compliance officers, and investigators were already reviewing every detail. I typed back calmly, "Glad everyone's healthy." I didn't mention the hospital. I didn't mention the paperwork. I didn't mention the investigation. There was no need, because once systems like this start moving, they don't stop quietly. And for the first time since this all began, I understood something very clearly. The truth had documentation. And documentation always wins. 2 days after I spoke with the hospital's legal department, my phone rang again. This time, I didn't need to look at the screen to know it wasn't family. There was something different about the timing. Something heavier. When I answered, a calm male voice greeted me. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Detective Richardson with the Denver Police Department." I sat down immediately. Up until that moment, everything had felt procedural: paperwork, emails, policies. Hearing the word police shifted the weight of the situation instantly. "Yes," I said. "This is Carol Martinez. I'm calling in regard to a fraud report connected to Denver General Hospital," he continued. "I'd like to ask you a few questions and verify some information." I told him I understood. What followed was one of the most methodical conversations I've ever had. He asked me to start from the beginning, so I did. I told him about the phone call from Jessica inviting me to be present for the birth. I explained the sudden warmth in her voice, how unusual it was, and how convincing it sounded at the time. I described the 15-hour drive from Phoenix to Denver, including the weather, the stops, and the exhaustion. Then I explained what happened at the hospital, how I was turned away, how my son avoided eye contact, how the invitation suddenly vanished as if it had never existed. I told him about the call from the hospital regarding the unpaid bill. I explained how I learned my name had been listed as the financial guarantor without my consent. The detective listened quietly, occasionally asking me to clarify details or confirm dates and times. When I finished, there was a pause. "Mrs. Martinez," he said carefully, "based on what you've described and the documentation we've reviewed, this appears to be premeditated fraud." The word landed heavily. Premeditated, that meant it wasn't an emotional mistake. It wasn't postpartum confusion. It wasn't an accident made under stress. It meant planning. He asked me to send over all evidence I had: messages, call logs, emails, photographs, travel records. I told him I already had everything organized and sent it over immediately. Text messages showing Jessica urging me to drive safely. Call logs proving when she contacted me. Time-stamped photos from my road trip. Hospital emails with the forged documents attached. Each piece confirmed the same thing: I couldn't have signed anything. Thank you, the detective said after reviewing the materials. This gives us a very clear timeline. Before we ended the call, he told me something that stayed with me. These kinds of cases rarely happen just once, he said. Patterns tend to repeat. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I didn't feel angry, I felt grounded. Because everything I had felt in my gut from the beginning, the unease, the confusion, the sense that something was wrong, finally had a name and a structure. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. A text from David. Hey mom, hope you're settled back in. Jessica and the baby are doing great. I read the message twice. The normalcy of it felt surreal. They were living under the assumption that everything had worked out in their favor, that I'd gone home quietly, embarrassed but defeated. They had no idea that a police investigation was now active. No idea that hospital compliance teams were reviewing records. No idea that legal departments were coordinating with law enforcement. I typed back slowly. Glad everyone's healthy, take care. It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the whole truth either. Because while they were settling into their new routine, something much bigger was already moving behind the scenes, quietly, thoroughly, and with consequences that couldn't be talked away. And whatever happened next, it wouldn't be controlled by excuses or emotions. It would be decided by evidence. You always think lies end with a phone call, an argument, an explanation, someone getting caught and talking their way out of it. But I learned something that Tuesday morning. When lies are truly finished, the police don't call, they knock. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Phoenix, halfway through my first cup of coffee, trying to enjoy the quiet. The house was still. The sun was just coming through the window. For the first time in days, my thoughts weren't racing. Then my phone rang, unknown number, Denver area code. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel surprised either. Somewhere deep down, I knew exactly who it was. Mrs. Martinez, the voice said, calm and steady. This is Detective Richardson again. I wanted to inform you that we executed a warrant this morning. A warrant. I didn't ask where, I already knew. They went to your son David's residence, he continued. And yes, your daughter-in-law was taken into custody. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Not relief, not satisfaction, not happiness, just confirmation. The kind that settles into your bones and tells you that you weren't crazy, that you didn't imagine the manipulation, the timing, the cruelty of it all. She's being charged with identity theft, forgery, and wire fraud, the detective continued. Because the activity crossed state lines, federal agencies are now involved. Federal, that word carries weight. It means paperwork doesn't disappear. It means explanations don't work. It means there are consequences that can't be smoothed over. I thanked him quietly and ended the call. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone started ringing again. David, I let it ring, once, twice. When I finally answered, he didn't even say hello. What the hell did you do? He shouted, his voice cracking, barely holding together. There it was. I kept my voice calm. I reported fraud when the hospital called me asking how I wanted to pay your wife's delivery bill. There was a pause. What delivery bill? He snapped. Insurance covered everything. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the truth had finally caught up. No, David, I said gently. Your insurance was denied. That's why they tried to put the bill in my name. Silence. The kind that tells you someone's world is starting to tilt. Then I heard it, Jessica, screaming in the background, panicked, shrill, out of control. The sound of someone realizing they're no longer in charge of the story. Mom, David said again, quieter now, shaken. The police say Jessica forged your signature. That can't be right. There's video footage, I replied, of her submitting the forms herself. Another long pause. And in that silence, I could almost hear the moment when denial starts to crack, when the lies don't explode all at once, but slowly seep in until there's nowhere left to hide. After that long silence on the phone, David spoke again, but his voice was different now. Lower, unsteady, like someone trying to hold together a reality that was already breaking apart. She says it was a misunderstanding, he said. She says she was just listing you as an emergency contact. I closed my eyes, not out of frustration, but out of exhaustion. David, I said carefully, I worked in medical billing for 35 years. I know the difference between an emergency contact and a financial guarantor. He didn't respond right away. She says she never meant for it to turn into this, he finally said. She says she was overwhelmed and didn't know what she was doing. That was when I felt something inside me harden. She forged my signature, I said. She did it while texting me about how excited she was to see me. That's not confusion, that's planning. I heard him swallow. She says she didn't think it would matter, he whispered. She thought the insurance would go through, and when it didn't, I asked. She let the bill land on me. Still, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth doesn't need volume. Then the phone shifted. I heard movement, breathing, crying. Jessica's voice came through next. Carol, please, she sobbed. I was scared. I just had a baby. I wasn't thinking clearly. Her tone was completely different now. No confidence, no control, just desperation. I didn't know what I was doing, she continued. I didn't mean to hurt you. I listened. I really did. Then I spoke. You excluded me from my grandson's birth, I said calmly. You humiliated me. You made me drive 15 hours only to push me out. And then you tried to make me pay for it. She started crying harder. My hormones were everywhere, she said. I was emotional. I wasn't myself. Hormones don't steal identities, I replied. They don't forge signatures. And they don't time paperwork for when someone is on the road and can't respond. Silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. I could hear David breathing, shallow, uneven. Mom, he said quietly, what happens now? That question carried more weight than anything else he'd said, because it wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about the arrest. It was about consequences. That depends on the investigation, I answered. I told the truth. I gave them evidence. I didn't exaggerate anything. Jessica snapped. You're ruining my life, she screamed. You could have just paid the bill. I didn't flinch. No, I said softly. You ruined your own life when you decided to use mine. Another pause. Then David spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. Is there any way to fix this? I took a deep breath. This is bigger than me now, I said. It's not my decision anymore. That's when the detective came back on the line. Mrs. Martinez, he said, there's something else we need to discuss. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. It wasn't about the charges already filed. It was about something more, something that suggested this situation wasn't as isolated as anyone had hoped. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. I already knew it was Detective Richardson before I even looked at the screen. There was a heaviness to the moment, the kind you feel when you sense that the truth you're about to hear is going to change the shape of everything that came before it. Mrs. Martinez, he said after I answered, there's something else you need to be aware of. I sat down slowly, bracing myself. When we ran Jessica's information through our system, he continued, we found records that matched similar incidents tied to her name. Similar incidents. The words echoed in my head. Can you explain what that means? I asked. It means there are prior reports, he said carefully. Different locations, different victims, same pattern. I felt the room go cold. He explained that in at least 3 other cases, family members or close acquaintances had reported unexplained financial issues, accounts opened without permission, medical paperwork signed without consent, personal information used in ways that couldn't be explained away. Each time the situations were resolved quietly, bills paid off, charges dropped, families choosing peace over confrontation, but the pattern remained. This wasn't desperation, the detective said. This was behavior that had been practiced. I thought back to how confidently Jessica had handled everything, the timing, the paperwork, the way she shifted stories depending on who she was speaking to. At the time, I had mistaken it for stress or anxiety. Now it looked very different. After we ended the call, my phone buzzed again. A text message from David. Mom, Emma just called me. She says Jessica took out credit cards in her name last year. Emma, my niece. My hands started to tremble as I read the message again. Jessica hadn't just targeted me, she had targeted the family, one person at a time, quietly. Carefully, I sat down on the edge of the couch, trying to process how deep this went. While I had been imagining holding my grandson for the first time, she had been running plays, testing limits, learning how much she could get away with. The hospital bill wasn't the crime that defined her. It was the mistake that exposed her. Another call came in, this time from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and unmistakably official. Mrs. Martinez, the man said, this is Special Agent Collins. I'm calling from a federal task force assisting with the investigation. Federal, hearing it again sent a chill through me. He explained that because the fraud involved interstate activity and electronic documentation, multiple agencies were now involved. What had started as a hospital billing issue had uncovered something far larger. When the call ended, I sat in silence, thinking about how close I had come to dismissing my instincts, to believing that this was just family tension, just misunderstanding. If I had paid that bill, if I had stayed quiet, if I had gone home and let it go, none of this would have come to light. Jessica would have moved on to the next person. That realization stayed with me. Because sometimes the thing that hurts you the most is also the thing that stops someone else from being hurt next. And whether David understood it yet or not, the truth was finally out in the open, not because I sought revenge, but because I refused to carry someone else's crime in my name. Nothing prepares you for hearing the words, "This is the FBI." It was Wednesday morning, and I hadn't slept much the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed the same moments on a loop, the long drive, the lies, David's voice breaking over the phone, the sound of Jessica screaming in the background as her world collapsed. My body was exhausted, but my thoughts wouldn't slow down. I was standing in my kitchen, staring into a mug of coffee I hadn't touched when my phone rang again. Unknown number. I noticed something immediately. The tone felt different. Not rushed, not emotional, controlled, deliberate, I answered. Mrs. Martinez, a woman said, calm and professional, my name is Lisa Chen. I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, gripping the edge as if the room itself had shifted. Yes, I finally said, this is Carol Martinez. We've been looped into the fraud investigation involving Jessica Martinez, she continued. Hearing Jessica's full name spoken that way, clearly, formally, without emotion, sent a chill through me. This wasn't gossip anymore. This wasn't family conflict. This was a case. Because the identity theft crossed state lines, Agent Chen said, it now falls under federal jurisdiction. Federal, I'd heard the word before, but this time it landed differently, heavier, final. She explained that her team had been reviewing the hospital documentation, the electronic signatures, the digital timestamps, and the financial data connected to my identity. This isn't a misunderstanding, she said. And it isn't isolated. That sentence alone told me more than she probably intended. She asked if she could come by my house later that afternoon to speak with me in person. Of course, I said. My voice stayed steady, but my hands didn't. After I hung up, I noticed they were shaking slightly as I placed the phone back on the table. FBI agents don't come to your house for family drama. They come when there's a pattern. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I straightened the house even though it didn't need it. I sat, I stood. I checked the window more times than I could count. I kept thinking about how easily all of this could have stayed buried. If I had paid the bill, if I had stayed quiet, if I had convinced myself that being excluded was just something I deserved. Instead, the truth had kept unfolding layer by layer until it reached this moment. Right on time, a dark sedan pulled up outside. Agent Chen stepped out, dressed sharply, her movements calm and deliberate. She carried herself with quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need to be allowed to be taken seriously. When she walked into my kitchen and sat across from me, she didn't rush. Mrs. Martinez, she said, before we begin, I need you to understand something. You are not in trouble. You did the right thing by reporting this. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. She opened her notebook. What you experienced, she continued, was not just financial fraud. It involved deception, coercion, and calculated psychological manipulation. Psychological manipulation. Those words stayed with me, because suddenly every detail made sense, the sudden affection, the urgency, the way I was pulled in emotionally before being pushed out completely. Agent Chen asked me to walk her through everything again, from the phone call inviting me to Denver to the moment I received the hospital bill. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt, she didn't react. She simply listened and took notes. When I finished, she closed her notebook slowly. Thank you, she said. What you shared confirms several things we've already suspected. That was the moment I realized something important. My case wasn't the beginning of this investigation, and it wouldn't be the end. Agent Chen arrived at my house that afternoon carrying a thick manila folder tucked under her arm. The moment I saw it, my stomach tightened. There's something about physical evidence, paper you can hold, weight you can feel, that makes the truth impossible to ignore. This wasn't a single document or a thin file. This was heavy, thick, organized. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, placed the folder between us, and rested her hands calmly on top of it. Mrs. Martinez, she said, meeting my eyes, I want to prepare you for what you're about to see. I nodded, even though I didn't feel ready at all. Based on our investigation so far, she continued, Jessica Martinez is connected to at least 6 confirmed identity theft cases across 4 states. 6, the number echoed in my head as if she'd said it twice. Across 4 states, I felt my chest tighten as she opened the folder and began laying documents out on the table, one by one, names, dates, dollar amounts. Each page told a different story, but the structure was always the same. Over the past 3 years, Agent Chen explained, she has taken more than $47,000 from people who trusted her. Trusted her, not strangers, not corporations, not faceless institutions, family. She pointed to the first document. Your son's sister in California, she said. $8,000 in credit card debt opened in her name. The charges were spread out slowly so they wouldn't raise alarms. I swallowed hard. The next page, Jessica's own sister in Seattle, Agent Chen continued. A hospital bill placed under her name after a medical emergency. $5,000. My hands clenched in my lap. Another page slid forward. A cousin in Texas, she said. A $12,000 car loan taken out using his personal information. Monthly payments were made just long enough to avoid suspicion. Each story followed the same pattern, a plausible excuse. Emotional pressure, partial payments to keep people quiet. She never took everything at once, Agent Chen explained. She spaced the fraud out intentionally, different states, different timelines, so no single agency would connect the dots. That was the part that made me feel sick. This wasn't impulsive, this wasn't desperation, it was strategy. She studied how long she could get away with it, Agent Chen said, and when questions started to form, she moved on to someone else. I thought about how confident Jessica had always seemed. How easily she spoke, how naturally she shifted her tone depending on who she was talking to. She hadn't been panicking, she'd been performing. Agent Chen tapped the folder gently. The hospital bill connected to you, she said, is what exposed everything. I looked up. It didn't match her usual pattern, she explained. It was rushed, the emotional manipulation was heavier, the paper trail was sloppier. Meaning she had done this so many times before that she normally knew how to hide it better. She underestimated you, Agent Chen added, and she didn't account for your background in medical billing. I let out a slow breath. For the first time, I understood something clearly. I wasn't targeted because I was weak. I was targeted because she thought I was safe, older, polite, unlikely to push back. Agent Chen gathered the papers back into the folder. We're still uncovering more, she said, and there may be additional victims we haven't identified yet. That sentence settled heavily in the room. How many people knew? I asked quietly. Most didn't, she replied. And the ones who suspected something often chose silence to protect family relationships. I nodded. I understood that choice more than I wanted to admit. As she stood to leave, Agent Chen paused. There's one more thing we need to discuss, she said, something that makes your case different from the others. Her tone changed slightly, more serious, more deliberate, and I knew before she even said another word that what came next was going to hurt in a way numbers and documents never could. Agent Chen didn't sit back down right away. Instead, she remained standing near the kitchen table, her hands resting lightly on the edge, as if she wanted to make sure I was steady before continuing. Mrs. Martinez, she said carefully, your case stands out from the others. I felt my stomach tighten. In what way? I asked. She took a breath. Most of the other victims were targeted for access, she explained. Access to credit, access to accounts, access to clean financial histories that could be exploited quietly. She paused, choosing her words. You were targeted for something else. I waited. For control, she said. That word settled into the room and stayed there. Agent Chen explained that when her team reviewed the hospital communications, they noticed something unusual. Jessica hadn't just filled out paperwork in my name. She had created an entire narrative around me. She told hospital staff you were financially comfortable, Agent Chen said, that you were excited to cover the delivery expenses as a gift. My jaw clenched. She said you specifically requested to be listed as financially responsible, she continued, that it was important to you. So while I was being shut out of my grandson's birth, while I was sitting alone in a hotel room waiting for a call that never came, she was telling complete strangers that I was thrilled to pay for everything. She positioned you as eager, Agent Chen said, willing, grateful to be included. I felt a slow burn rise in my chest, not explosive anger, but something colder and heavier. She didn't just steal your identity, Agent Chen went on. She reshaped it. That was the part that hurt the most. I asked the question that had been circling my thoughts since the beginning. Was this planned? I said quietly. Agent Chen didn't hesitate. Yes, she reached into the folder and pulled out another document, sliding it across the table toward me. This shows when Jessica accessed your financial background, she said. Credit history checks. Address verification, employment references. I looked at the dates. Weeks before the baby was born, weeks before she ever called me, weeks before she invited me to Denver. She gathered your information long before the delivery, Agent Chen explained. Before the invitation, before the trip. The realization hit me all at once. That phone call hadn't been spontaneous. That warmth hadn't been real. That invitation hadn't been about family. It had been a setup. She didn't act out of panic, Agent Chen said. She followed a plan. I thought about how precise everything had been, the timing of the messages, the way she reassured me during the drive, the sudden shift once I arrived. She hadn't lost control, she had executed a strategy. And there's something else, Agent Chen added. Your background mattered. My background? I asked. She knew you worked in medical billing, Agent Chen said. Which meant you understood paperwork, but she assumed you wouldn't question it if you believed you were helping your family. I let out a slow breath. She hadn't misjudged my intelligence. She had gambled on my love. That's why your case is different, Agent Chen said. The emotional manipulation was deeper, more personal. I felt something inside me settle into place. This wasn't a daughter-in-law making a bad decision under stress. This was someone who had identified a vulnerability and exploited it carefully, deliberately. Agent Chen closed the folder. Mrs. Martinez, she said gently, I need you to understand something very clearly. I looked up. You didn't cause this, you didn't escalate it, you didn't ruin anything. She met my eyes, you exposed it. That sentence stayed with me long after she left, because for days I had questioned myself, wondered if I should have stayed quiet, if reporting the fraud had been too much, if speaking up had somehow made things worse. But sitting there alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the afternoon light, I finally understood the truth. If I hadn't spoken up, this would have continued. If I had stayed silent, someone else would have been next. I wasn't chosen because I was careless. I was chosen because I was trusted. And the moment I refused to carry someone else's crime in my name, the entire structure collapsed. You know things are bad when your phone stops feeling like a tool and starts feeling like a confession line. After Agent Chen left my house, I stayed seated at the kitchen table long after the front door closed. The folder she'd brought was still there, resting where she'd placed it, thick and unmoving like it carried its own gravity. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. Everything inside it was already playing on repeat in my head. The house was quiet in that uncomfortable way, not peaceful, just empty. I stared at the surface of the table, tracing old scratches with my eyes, trying to slow my thoughts. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. I hadn't noticed. Then my phone rang. Emma, David's younger sister. I hesitated before answering. Something in my chest tightened like I already knew what was coming. The moment I picked up, she spoke fast and breathless. "Aunt Carol, did Jessica steal from you too?" There was no greeting, no small talk, just fear. My heart sank. "Yes," I said quietly. "She tried." On the other end of the line, Emma exhaled sharply, like she'd been holding her breath for a year. "Oh my God," she whispered, and then the words started tumbling out of her. She told me how, almost a year earlier, credit card statements started showing up that made no sense. Charges she didn't recognize, thousands of dollars. Stores she'd never been to. At first, she thought it was a mistake, then she thought it was fraud. When she confronted Jessica, the response had been immediate and emotional. Tears, apologies, panic. She said it must have been an accident, Emma told me. She said she didn't know how it happened. She swore she'd fix it, and for a while it looked like she had. Jessica made a few payments, just enough to calm the situation down. Just enough to make Emma question herself. "I didn't want to blow up the family," Emma said, "so I let it go." But when the charges kept appearing and Emma pushed harder, the tone changed. "She told David I was being dramatic," Emma said, "that I was accusing her for no reason, that I was attacking her." I closed my eyes. It was the same pattern: deflect, victimize herself, turn people against each other. Emma wasn't careless, she was manipulated. We talked for nearly an hour. By the time we hung up, my chest felt tight, but something else had changed too. I wasn't alone anymore. By nightfall, my phone rang again, a cousin. Then less than an hour later, another call, this one from Jessica's own sister. Different voices, different details. Same story, unexplained charges, convincing excuses, partial repayments. Pressure to stay quiet for the family. Each person thought they were the only one. Each person believed they were protecting relationships by staying silent. That's when it finally clicked. Jessica didn't just steal money, she stole silence. She counted on people being too embarrassed to speak up, too afraid of conflict, too worried about tearing the family apart, and it worked until it didn't. When I finally set my phone down that night, the house felt different. Heavier but clearer. What started as my story had become something much bigger. This wasn't about one bill or one betrayal. It was about a pattern that survived because everyone suffered quietly, and now the quiet was gone. I knew something had changed the moment David called me back. It wasn't just the timing, it was the sound of his voice. Flat, hollow, stripped of the certainty he'd clung to for years. "Mom," he said quietly, "I talked to Emma." I didn't interrupt him. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Some realizations need space to land. "She told me everything," he continued. "The credit cards, the payments. The way Jessica convinced me she was being attacked." He stopped for a moment like he was trying to breathe through something heavy. "I feel like an idiot." "No," I said calmly. "You trusted your wife. That's not stupidity." "That's normal." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "She always had an explanation," he said. "Every time something didn't add up, she had a reason, and I wanted to believe her." I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, not just physical, but emotional. The kind that comes from realizing you've been defending something that was hurting other people. "Mom," he said after a pause, "did she plan to keep you away from the birth from the start?" That question hurt more than he probably realized. "Yes," I answered honestly. There was no point softening it now. "She told me you being there would stress her out," he whispered. "She said it was better this way, that you'd understand." I felt that familiar sting return, the memory of standing in that hospital hallway, being treated like a problem instead of family. "I am immediate family," I said quietly, "and she knew exactly what she was doing when she pushed me out." His breathing changed. "I should have told you," he said. "I should have questioned it. I should have stopped her." "Yes," I replied. "You should have." I didn't say it harshly. I didn't need to. He didn't argue. "I chose her over you," he said, his voice breaking. "And now I don't even know who she is." That admission carried years of weight. David had spent so long defending her that he hadn't allowed himself to question anything. Letting go of that identity, the loyal husband, the protector, was unraveling him in real time. "She convinced me everyone was against her," he said. "That you, Emma, everyone was overreacting." "That's how manipulation works," I said. "It isolates people, makes them doubt their own instincts." There was a long pause on the line. I don't recognize my own life anymore, he said finally. Neither did I. We sat in silence together for a while, not awkward, not empty, just heavy. Then David spoke again. Mom, what happens now? That question didn't have a simple answer. Now, I said carefully, the truth keeps moving forward whether any of us are ready or not. He exhaled slowly. I don't know how to face this, he admitted. Everyone I defended, I was wrong about all of it. You weren't wrong to love someone, I said, but love doesn't mean ignoring harm. He didn't respond right away. I'm scared, he said quietly, scared of what this means. For my marriage, for my son, for everything. I understood that fear, but fear doesn't erase consequences. And for the first time since this all began, David wasn't asking me to fix it for him. He was finally seeing it. And that, more than anything else, told me this story wasn't over yet. There was a long pause after David admitted he didn't recognize his own life anymore. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, slow and uneven, like someone standing at the edge of something they didn't know how to step away from. Then he finally asked the question I knew had been sitting in his chest the entire time. Mom, what happens to Nathan if she goes to prison? I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't care, but because this wasn't a question you answer quickly. It wasn't about logistics. It wasn't about sympathy. It was about responsibility. David continued before I could speak. I can't afford childcare alone, he said. I barely cover the mortgage as it is. If she's gone, I don't know how I'd make this work. And there it was, not anger, not denial, fear. He wasn't asking me to protect Jessica anymore. He was asking me to absorb the consequences of what she had done. I chose my words carefully. David, I said, your wife committed federal crimes against multiple people. I know, he replied quickly. I know what she did was wrong. I'm not defending that. He stopped, then said quietly, she's still Nathan's mother. And I'm still your mother, I said, the one she humiliated, the one she tried to rob. The one you stood aside while she pushed me out. The silence that followed was thick. He knew I was right. I don't want Nathan to grow up without her, David said. I don't want him to think his mother disappeared because she was bad. And I don't want Nathan growing up believing this kind of behavior has no consequences, I replied. Because one day that lesson comes back around. He didn't respond immediately. I could almost hear the weight of that truth settling in. This isn't about punishment, I continued. It's about accountability. About showing a child that hurting people, especially family, isn't something you can explain away. David's voice dropped to a whisper. She planned all of this, didn't she? Yes, I said. She did. That confirmation seemed to break something open inside him. I defended her, he said. I turned against my own family because she told me to. I believed her over everyone else. You were manipulated, I said. But that doesn't mean you're helpless now. Another long pause. I don't know how to raise him alone, David admitted. I don't know how to be both parents. You don't have to be both, I said. You just have to be present. And honest, he sighed deeply. I feel like everything I built was a lie, he said. I know, I replied, but what you do next is real. David was quiet for a long time, then he asked something softer, smaller. Would you still want to be part of Nathan's life? That question hit harder than anything else he'd said. I wanted to be there from the beginning, I said. That never changed. His voice cracked. I took that from you. Yes, I said gently. You did, but I didn't say it to punish him. I said it so he wouldn't forget, because pretending harm didn't happen doesn't heal it. I don't know what the future looks like, David said. Everything feels uncertain. That's because the lies are gone, I replied, and the truth doesn't come with a script. When we finally ended the call, I sat quietly, holding my phone long after the screen went dark. This wasn't just about fraud anymore. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about what happens when the truth finally clears the room and everyone has to decide who they're going to be without the lies holding things together. And I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't be simple, but it would be honest. When my doorbell rang that night, I wasn't prepared for what was standing on the other side. It was just before 9 o'clock. The house was quiet, lights low, the kind of stillness that settles in after an emotionally exhausting day. Outside, it was already dark, the street silent except for the occasional car passing by. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. David was standing there. He looked nothing like the man I'd spoken to on the phone earlier. His face was unshaven, his eyes red and hollow like he hadn't slept at all. His shoulders were slumped forward, protective, tense. And pressed tightly against his chest was Nathan, my grandson. He held that baby like the world itself might try to take him next. Behind David, sitting on the porch like a quiet confession, was a duffel bag, no suitcase. No planning, just necessity. Mom, he said softly, barely able to meet my eyes, can Nathan and I stay here tonight? That was all it took. No arguments, no explanations, no anger left to spend. Just a man who had finally realized his home wasn't safe anymore, not emotionally, not mentally, not even psychologically. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around both of them at once. David's body trembled slightly when he leaned into me, like he'd been holding himself together by force alone. Nathan was warm, solid, real. I felt the gentle rise and fall of his tiny chest against me, the soft weight of him in my arms. This was the baby I had driven 15 hours to meet, the baby I had been denied, the baby whose first days I had missed because of lies, and now he was here in my house, under my roof. As I helped David bring the bag inside, the reality of the moment settled in. This wasn't a visit, this was retreat. I showed him to the guest room, keeping my movements quiet, deliberate. Nathan stirred slightly as I laid him down, then settled again, peaceful and unaware of the chaos that surrounded his arrival into the world. David stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching his son sleep. "I can't stay in that house anymore," he whispered. "Every room feels like a lie." I believed him, because when trust breaks at that level, it doesn't stay contained. It seeps into walls, furniture, memories. Every shared space becomes contaminated. We went back to the kitchen, neither of us turning on the lights. The silence felt different now, not empty, but heavy with truth. "I didn't plan this," David said quietly. I couldn't breathe there anymore." "You did the right thing," I said, "for Nathan and for yourself." He nodded, but his eyes were distant. "I keep replaying everything," he said, "every excuse I believed. Every time I defended her, every time I told myself I was overreacting. That's what manipulation does," I said. "It teaches you to doubt your own instincts." David ran his hands through his hair and exhaled slowly. "I don't know who I married," he said. That sentence lingered between us. I thought about how many times I had questioned myself, my instincts, my reactions, my hurt, and how close I had come to believing I was the problem. Now my son was standing in the same place. "You're here now," I said gently. "That matters." He looked up at me then, really looked, and for the first time in days I saw something shift, not relief, but safety. That night, David slept in my house. Nathan slept in the next room, breathing softly, untouched by the weight of adult lies. And as I lay awake listening to the quiet sounds of a home suddenly full again, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was the moment everything changed. Once Nathan was asleep, the house fell into a different kind of quiet, not the lonely silence I'd grown used to, but a heavy, watchful stillness. The kind that settles in when truth is waiting to be spoken. David and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table. No television, no phones, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I could tell he was exhausted, but sleep was the last thing on his mind. He rubbed his hands together slowly, staring at the grain of the wood like it might give him answers. "Moms," he finally said, "the FBI asked me something today that I can't stop thinking about." I looked up at him. "What did they ask you?" He swallowed hard. "They asked me if I knew my wife's real name." For a moment, I didn't respond. Not because I was surprised, but because hearing it said out loud made it real in a way nothing else had yet. "David," I said carefully, "what do you mean?" He shook his head, a short, disbelieving laugh escaping his throat. "They said Jessica Martinez might not even be her real identity." The words sat between us, heavy and unreal. I watched my son's face drain of color as the implications started lining up in his mind. "That's impossible," he said quickly. "I would have known. We're married. I've seen her documents." "Have you?" I asked gently. He opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. "I mean, I've seen copies," he said. "She handled most of the paperwork. She always said it was easier that way." I nodded slowly. "That was always how it started. She told me everything about her childhood," he continued, his voice growing unsteady. "Her parents, her college. Her first job, did she show you any of it?" I asked. He went quiet. "No," he admitted. "Not really. Stories, pictures on her phone, but nothing concrete." I took a breath. "David," I said softly, "her attorney already slipped." He looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "She served time before," I said, "in Oregon for identity theft, years ago." The room seemed to tilt. "That's not possible," he said again, louder this time. "I would have known. Background checks, employment, marriage license." "She changed her name," I said, "moved states. Started over." He stared at me like I'd just spoken another language. "She told me about her college," he said weakly, "about her roommates, about her parents' house." "Did you ever meet anyone from her past?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "No old friends," he whispered. "No childhood photos, no reunions, no one ever visited." That was when it hit him. I watched it happen in real time, the moment the pattern clicked into place. "She never talks to anyone from before she met me," he said, "ever, because there was no past she could safely show him. Everything she'd shared had been curated, controlled, safe. She said her family was complicated," David continued. "That she didn't want drama." "That wasn't about drama," I said. "That was about distance." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "My God," he muttered, "I married a story." A quiet laugh escaped him, sharp and hollow. "I defended her against everyone," he said. "I told people they were wrong about her. You defended what you were shown, I replied, not what was hidden. He pressed his palms to his eyes. I don't know who she is, he said. Or if I ever did. That admission hurt him more than anger ever could. People like her, I said carefully, don't lie about one thing. They build an entire identity around what they need people to believe. David nodded slowly. She always needed to be in control, he said. Money, decisions, information. And now, I said, that control is gone. He looked toward the hallway where Nathan slept. What if everything tied to her is fake? He asked. What if even our marriage? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The weight of that possibility settled over both of us. We'll face that when we have to, I said, one step at a time. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. I thought I knew my life, he said. I thought I knew my wife. You knew the version she needed you to see, I replied. We sat in silence for a long time after that. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because the truth had finally reached a place where words struggled to keep up. And somewhere down the hall, my grandson slept peacefully, unaware that the foundation of the life he'd been born into was being carefully, painfully dismantled. The next morning came quietly. No alarms, no rush, just the soft sound of Nathan stirring in the guest room and the faint light creeping through the kitchen window. David looked like he hadn't slept at all. He sat at the table with his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, staring straight ahead like he was bracing for impact. It didn't take long for the phone to ring. He glanced at the screen and froze, then he answered. I didn't hear the voice on the other end, but I could tell who it was by the way David's posture changed. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw tightened. Yes, he said quietly, I understand. A pause. No, I'm not disputing that, he replied. I need to know what that means. He ended the call slowly and set the phone down like it weighed 100 pounds. That was the FBI, he said. I didn't respond right away. They told me that if Jessica was living under a false identity, he continued, they have to verify whether our marriage is legally valid. The words felt unreal even as he spoke them. You mean, he started, then stopped. His voice cracked. You mean my whole marriage might not even exist on paper? I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. Yes, I said softly, that's what it means. He stared down at our hands like he couldn't quite connect them to reality. They said there could be issues with Nathan's birth certificate, he added. Insurance, records, everything tied to her name. Because if Jessica wasn't who she claimed to be, then every document connected to her identity had to be questioned. Marriage license, medical records, financial accounts, even parental documentation. My whole life, David whispered, might be built on paperwork that isn't real. I squeezed his hand gently. We'll fix what can be fixed, I said, but only by facing it head on. He nodded slowly, but I could see the grief settling in, not just grief for his marriage, but grief for the future he thought he had built. I feel stupid, he said, like I missed something obvious. You weren't looking for lies, I replied. You were looking for a partner. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. I don't know what's real anymore, he said. That feeling passes, I told him, but only if you stop pretending. Later that morning, an agent arrived to collect additional documents. Everything was calm, professional, methodical, no drama, no accusations, just facts. David answered questions, signed forms, took notes. Nathan slept through all of it. That was the part that stayed with me. While adults were unraveling lies years in the making, a newborn slept peacefully, unaware that the foundation beneath him was being rebuilt from scratch. That night, David stayed again, so did Nathan. As I tucked my grandson into the crib we'd set up hastily, I felt something settle inside me. Jessica hadn't just underestimated me, she'd underestimated a mother, a grandmother. A woman who had nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. Whatever came next, courtrooms, paperwork, investigations, it would be handled, because illusions can survive distance. They can survive silence. But they cannot survive truth once it's finally allowed into the room. You don't pull off crimes this precise unless someone taught you how. That truth became impossible to ignore the next morning. The FBI returned just after sunrise. Same calm voices, same professional demeanor. But something about their presence felt different this time, heavier, more deliberate, like they were stepping into a deeper layer of the story. Agent Chen sat across from us at the kitchen table again. David was beside me, Nathan asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware of the danger that had been circling his life before it even began. Mrs. Martinez, Agent Chen said, folding her hands together, there's another person we need to discuss. She paused. A man named Marcus Webb. The name meant nothing to me. I shook my head slowly. I don't know who that is, but David's reaction was immediate. His entire body stiffened, his eyes fixed on the table like it might collapse. That's her ex-husband, he said slowly. At least, that's what she told me. Agent Chen nodded once like she'd expected that answer. Marcus Webb is a known con artist, she said evenly. His record includes identity theft, wire fraud, and long-term family-based financial scams. family-based. That phrase landed harder than anything else she'd said. These are not random crimes, Agent Chen continued. They're structured. Plan, taught, David repeated. Yes, she said. Jessica didn't invent these methods. She was trained. The word hung in the air like smoke. Trained, like fraud was a trade, like deception was an apprenticeship. Like destroying families was something you could be coached into. Agent Chen slid several photographs across the table. One face stood out immediately. Marcus Webb, sharp features, cold eyes. That unmistakable smile, the kind worn by people who believe they're smarter than everyone else in the room. He's been running similar operations across multiple states, Agent Chen explained. Women embedded into families. Romantic relationships used as long-term cover. I felt something cold move through my chest. David stared at the photo like it might blink. She told me he abused her, he said quietly, that he ruined her life. That she escaped him. Agent Chen didn't react emotionally. He ruined lives, she said, and your family was next. David rubbed his face with both hands, struggling to process it. So everything she told me, all of it, his voice trailed off, was curated, Agent Chen said. Victim narratives are common in these cases. They build trust, they lower suspicion. I thought back to all the times Jessica had framed herself as fragile. Overwhelmed, misunderstood. The way she spoke about being alone in the world, disconnected from her past. It hadn't been vulnerability, it had been insulation. She told me she hated talking about him, David said. That it was too painful. That's also common, Agent Chen replied. Distance from the truth keeps people from asking questions. The agent leaned forward slightly. What you need to understand, she said, is that this level of coordination doesn't happen by accident. These scams are generational, learned behavior. Generational. That word made my stomach tight. She wasn't acting impulsively, Agent Chen continued. She was executing something she had seen work before. David looked at me then, eyes full of something I hadn't seen before. Fear not for himself, but for his son. She married me, he said slowly, already knowing how to do this. Yes, Agent Chen said, and she knew exactly how long to wait. The room went quiet. All I could think about was how close this had come to staying hidden. How easily love, trust, and silence could have allowed this to continue for years. Jessica hadn't stumbled into crime. She had been shaped by it, and whatever came next, it was clear now that this story was far bigger than one woman making bad choices. Agent Chen didn't soften her tone when she continued. Marcus Webb doesn't operate on impulse, she said. He profiles families. That single word made my stomach turn. Profiles weren't guesses, they weren't hunches. They were built with intention. David straightened in his chair. What do you mean, profiles? Agent Chen opened her laptop and turned the screen toward us. Marcus Webb keeps detailed files, she explained. Financial stability, property ownership, employment history, family structure, emotional dynamics. Files, not stories, not assumptions, data. These operations are planned months, sometimes years in advance, she continued. Targets are chosen based on how much access can be gained without raising suspicion. Her eyes flicked briefly toward David. Men with stable incomes, she said. Predictable schedules, strong family values. David swallowed. People who want to believe the best in their partners, she added. Then she looked directly at me. And financially secure older relatives with strong emotional attachment to the family. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. You weren't unlucky, Agent Chen said calmly. You were selected. The words hit harder than any accusation could have. She reached into the folder and slid several documents across the table. Printed spreadsheets, notes. Highlighted sections, property values tied to my address. Estimates of retirement income, notes referencing my years in medical billing. My life reduced to bullet points. One line stood out so sharply it made my vision blur. Mother emotionally attached, likely compliant under family pressure. David's hand slammed down on the table before I could stop him. They studied you, he said, his voice shaking. They planned this. Yes, Agent Chen said. This wasn't opportunistic, it was strategic. She explained how Marcus Webb trained his partners to embed themselves into families slowly, never rushing, never taking too much too soon. Money is secondary at first, she said. Trust comes first. Jessica's role had been clear. Build the relationship, isolate the target, create emotional leverage. Children accelerate compliance, Agent Chen said. They create urgency, sympathy, and long-term access. I thought about the pregnancy announcement, the sudden warmth, the invitation to Denver. None of it had been spontaneous. David's face had gone pale. She didn't marry me, he said quietly. She married a network, Agent Chen nodded. She married into a balance sheet, she said, and into emotional leverage. I felt sick. Every memory I replayed now looked different. The way Jessica positioned herself between David and his family, how she framed concern as criticism, how she always made herself the injured party. She always said my family didn't respect her, David said, that you didn't like her. That was intentional, Agent Chen replied. Isolation increases control. The agent continued explaining how families were divided slowly, small conflicts magnified, trust eroded one conversation at a time. Once the family fractures, she said, the individual becomes easier to manage. David stared at the documents like they were evidence of a life he no longer recognized. They planned this, he repeated, softer now. Every part of it, yes, Agent Chen said, including the timing of the baby. I felt my breath catch. The birth created financial opportunity, she explained, but more importantly, it created emotional leverage. She closed the folder slowly. What you need to understand, she said, is that the fraud was only phase one. That sentence hung in the air longer than anything else she'd said. Phase one? David asked. Agent Chen met his eyes. Yes, she said. What came next was far more serious. The room felt suddenly smaller. I glanced toward the hallway where Nathan slept, peaceful and unaware. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt real fear, not for what had already happened, but for what had nearly happened next. Agent Chen didn't raise her voice when she continued speaking. She didn't need to. What she said next drained every bit of warmth from the room. There's one more part of this plan you need to understand, she said quietly. David leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. I felt my chest tighten before she even finished her sentence. This operation wasn't meant to end with financial fraud, Agent Chen said. The long-term objective involved your son. For a moment, I didn't understand what she meant. Then she said his name. Nathan. My heart stopped. David's breath hitched sharply. What do you mean involved him? Agent Chen reached into the folder one last time and slid a document across the table. It wasn't financial. There were no dollar amounts, no account numbers, no balances. It was a timeline. Dates, notes, contingencies. They intended to disappear, she said. With the baby, disappear. The word echoed in my head, hollow and unreal. David pushed back from the table slightly, like the air had been knocked out of him. You're saying they were planning to take my son? He asked, his voice barely steady. Yes, Agent Chen replied. She explained it calmly, professionally, as if she were discussing logistics, because to people like Marcus Webb, that was exactly what it was. They planned to stage an accident, she said, or falsify deaths, insurance payouts, new identities. I felt my knees weaken, my hand instinctively reaching for the edge of the table. This isn't uncommon in long-term con operations, Agent Chen continued. Children provide leverage, sympathy, clean identities. Clean identities. David's eyes were glassy. She told me she wanted a fresh start, he whispered. She said we'd move someday, somewhere quiet. That was preparation, Agent Chen said, not a dream. The agent looked directly at David. If this investigation hadn't started when it did, she said carefully, your son would have been gone within 6 months. Gone. The word landed heavier than anything else so far. Gone from his home, gone from his family, raised by criminals, used as currency. I felt physically sick. All I could think about was Nathan sleeping peacefully down the hall, unaware that his life had nearly been rewritten before it even began. The hospital fraud wasn't the goal, Agent Chen said. It was a test to see how much resistance they'd face, she explained, how quickly people would push back, whether silence could be maintained. Jessica had failed that test the moment the hospital called me. She moved too fast, Agent Chen said. She underestimated you. David buried his face in his hands. She was going to take him, he said, his voice breaking. My own wife. Yes, Agent Chen said gently, and that's why we intervened. The room was silent for a long time after that. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some truths change the shape of your thoughts permanently. I thought about every moment I'd questioned myself, every time I'd wondered if I was overreacting, if reporting the fraud was too harsh, too extreme. If I had stayed quiet, Nathan would not be in the next room. That realization settled into my bones. This ends now, Agent Chen said. Marcus Webb is in custody. Jessica will not be released. Protective measures are already in place. David looked up slowly. She's never coming near him again, he said. No, Agent Chen replied. She's not. When the agents finally left, the house felt impossibly quiet. David didn't speak. He just stood up and walked down the hallway, stopping outside the guest room. He watched Nathan sleep for a long time. I stood behind him, one hand resting on his shoulder. She didn't just try to steal from us, he said finally. She tried to steal a life. Yes, I replied, and she failed. That night, as I sat beside my grandson's crib, listening to his soft breathing, I understood something with absolute clarity. This story didn't end with fraud, it ended with protection. And whatever came next, trials, sentences, consequences, one thing was already certain. Nathan was safe, and sometimes that's the only ending that matters. The truth doesn't whisper in a courtroom, it gets read out loud. The federal courtroom was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. Bright overhead lights reflected off polished wood and sterile walls. Everything felt sharp, exposed, unforgiving. There was no room for excuses in that space, no room for charm, no room for lies. Jessica sat at the defense table wearing an orange jumpsuit, her wrists cuffed in front of her. She looked smaller than I remembered, but not weaker. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning the room, darting from face to face like she was still searching for control. There was no makeup, no carefully practiced warmth, no gentle voice. And definitely no Mom Carol, just raw fear layered over anger. David sat beside me, holding Nathan against his chest. My grandson slept peacefully, unaware of where he was or why this room mattered. David's arms wrapped around him like an anchor, grounding him to something real while everything else came undone. When the judge entered, the room rose to its feet. The sound of chairs scraping echoed, then disappeared into silence. The prosecutor stood, and just like that, the air changed. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and precise, "this is not a case of financial desperation." Every word landed with intention. "This is a calculated, multi-state criminal operation." Jessica didn't move. She stared straight ahead. The prosecutor didn't rush. He didn't dramatize. He didn't need to. One by one, the facts were laid out. Identity theft across 4 states. 6 family members targeted. Forged signatures submitted electronically. False identities created and maintained for years. Prior convictions hidden under name changes. Documents appeared on screens. Timelines were read. Evidence that had once felt overwhelming to me was now methodically dismantling every defense she had left. David's breathing slowed as he listened. Mine did too. Then the prosecutor paused briefly before continuing. "And finally," he said, "the defendant planned to fake her own death and abduct her child for financial gain." The courtroom reacted instantly. Gasps, murmurs. Shock spreading row by row. I felt David's arms tighten around Nathan. Jessica's face didn't crack. No tears, no denial, just a tightening of her jaw. When the judge asked if the defendant wished to speak, Jessica stood, slowly. Deliberately, and for the first time, the mask slipped completely. "You all deserved it," she snapped, her voice sharp and venomous. "You were stupid, too trusting, easy." The room froze. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't react emotionally. She simply looked at Jessica and said, cold and final, "Sit down. You've said more than enough." Jessica hesitated for half a second, then obeyed. That was the moment I knew this was over, not because of the evidence. Not because of the charges, but because she had finally shown exactly who she was without apology, without remorse, without control. David looked at me then, his eyes full, his grip firm on Nathan. The lies that had once dominated our lives had nowhere left to hide. They were written into transcripts, entered into record, spoken where silence could no longer protect them. And as the courtroom settled back into stillness, I understood something deeply and completely. This wasn't just about justice. It was about truth finally being too loud to ignore. The courtroom went quiet in a way I had never experienced before. Not the kind of quiet where people are distracted or bored, but the kind where every single person is holding their breath, waiting for a number that will change lives forever. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at the papers in front of her. She didn't rush. She didn't dramatize the moment. Her calm was heavier than anger could ever be. "For the crimes of identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping," she began. Attempted kidnapping. Hearing those words spoken formally, without emotion, sent a chill through me. I felt David stiffen beside me, his arm tightening around Nathan instinctively. The judge continued. "This court has considered the scope of harm, the number of victims, the level of planning involved, and the complete lack of remorse shown by the defendant." Jessica stood motionless at the defense table, her face rigid. She stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, as if refusing to acknowledge what was coming. "For these reasons," the judge said, her voice firm and unwavering, "the defendant is hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison." 25. The number hung in the air like it had weight. No parole, no early release, no shortcuts, a quarter of a century. For the first time since the trial began, Jessica reacted. Her face collapsed, not into tears, but into fury. She screamed. A raw animal sound that ripped through the room and made several people flinch. Guards moved instantly, gripping her arms as she struggled, her voice cracking into incoherent rage. David pulled Nathan closer to his chest, turning slightly away from the chaos. My grandson stirred briefly, then settled again, oblivious to the moment that was rewriting his future. I expected to feel something sharp when the sentence was announced. Joy, vindication, relief. But what I felt instead was finality, the kind that settles deep in your bones and tells you something is truly finished. As the guards began to escort her out, Jessica twisted her head toward us, toward me. Our eyes met. There was no fear left in her expression, only hate, pure, concentrated hatred. And for the first time since I'd known her, it didn't scare me at all, because predators only look powerful when they believe no one will challenge them, when silence protects them, when guilt keeps people quiet. That protection was gone. The judge struck her gavel once. Court is adjourned. People began to move, murmuring quietly, but I stayed seated for a moment longer. My legs felt heavy, like they needed time to remember how to stand. David looked at me. "It's over," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "it is." We walked out of the courtroom together, my son, my grandson, and me. 3 generations leaving a place built for endings. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. Not because the pain had vanished, but because it finally had boundaries. Jessica's choices would no longer reach into our lives. Her lies would no longer dictate our future. As we stepped into the daylight, I realized something important. Justice doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it feels like closure, and sometimes closure is more powerful than anything else. When the trial ended, people expected everything to magically feel better. They assume justice flips a switch, that once a sentence is handed down, the damage disappears and life snaps back into place. That isn't how it works. What justice really does is stop the bleeding. It doesn't erase the scars, but it gives you space to heal without being wounded again. After the courtroom emptied and the noise faded, David and Nathan came home with me, not temporarily this time, not until things settle, but for good. The marriage was annulled, legally erased. Every document tied to Jessica's false identity was reviewed, corrected, and stripped of her name. Nathan's records were amended. His future was secured with truth instead of lies. Watching my son go through that process was painful, but it was also grounding. For the first time in years, he wasn't defending someone else. He was rebuilding himself, slowly, honestly. Some days were heavy. Others were quiet in a way that felt earned. Nathan grew. He learned to smile, to grab fingers, to laugh in his sleep. Each small milestone felt like a victory over everything that almost happened. One night, months after the trial, David and I sat in the living room while Nathan slept nearby. The house felt full, not loud, not chaotic, just whole. David broke the silence. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but emotional, "if you hadn't stood your ground, Nathan wouldn't be here." I didn't answer right away, because he was right and because that truth carried weight. Paying that hospital bill would have been easier. Staying quiet would have been simpler. Convincing myself it wasn't worth the trouble would have cost less in the moment. But quiet choices don't stop monsters. Silence protects them. Speaking up doesn't make you cruel. It makes you dangerous to the people who rely on secrecy. That's the part Jessica never understood. She thought kindness meant compliance. She thought age meant weakness. She thought family loyalty meant silence. What she never expected was a grandmother who refused to disappear, a woman who trusted her instincts, who followed the paper trail, who didn't confuse guilt with responsibility. I didn't win because I was louder. I won because I didn't look away. Life isn't perfect now, it never will be, but it's honest, it's grounded, it's safe. My son is rebuilding his confidence. My grandson is growing up protected. And I wake up each morning without fear ringing my phone. That's peace. And if there's one thing this story taught me, one thing I hope it leaves with you, it's this: never ignore your gut, never let guilt silence you. Never underestimate your own clarity, because the most dangerous people don't look like villains. They don't wear masks or carry weapons. They sit at family tables, they smile at holidays, they speak softly and ask for trust. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say, "No, this isn't right." If you made it this far, you're paying attention, and that matters. Tell me where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, stories like this aren't fiction. They're warnings, and awareness is how cycles end.